Billionaire cheated on his pregnant wife with Bestie Mistress. She didn't cry. She made them lose. In the glittering world of wealth and splendor, not every diamond that sparkles is pure. Behind the velvet curtains of high society, galas, and breathtaking mansions, true intentions can lie twisted in the shadows. When billionaire Thomas Rutherford, a charismatic real estate mogul, betrays his radiant, pregnant wife, Isabella, with none other than her lifelong best friend, people expect heartbreak and tears. But Isabella is no ordinary woman. Instead of crumbling beneath her agony, she weaves a cunning plan fueled by vengeance and justice. Little did Thomas or her so-called friend realize that Isabella's strength could rival any storm, and her retaliation would cost them everything. From the outside, the marriage of Thomas Rutherford and Isabella Sinclair seemed like a fairy tale. Thomas, the heir to the famous Rutherford estate in upstate New York, had multiplied his family's wealth through real estate ventures in Manhattan, building towering condominiums that bore his name. Isabella was the daughter of a prominent fashion designer, Margaret Sinclair, whose designs once graced the runways of Paris and Milan. Their wedding, planned by the notable wedding coordinator, Jennifer Zachman, who had famously organized events for Beyoncé, was the talk of the season. Isabella's beauty was legendary among their social circle. Long, honey-brown hair cascading over her shoulders, eyes the color of emeralds, and a figure that turned heads wherever she went. But it was her gentleness that stood out most. She had a warm heart and a sincere smile that made you feel at home the moment you met her. Most who knew her believed she was also innocent to a fault, the kind who never suspected mischief or ill intent from those close to her. At 30 years old, Thomas had a presence that dominated any room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident stride, he carried himself like a modern-day king. His voice alone, calm yet commanding, hinted at the power he wielded. A single look from him could sway investors and lure business partners from across the globe. Yet behind this charming exterior hid a ruthless appetite for success and control. He loved Isabella, or so it seemed, but he also loved the thrill of conquest, whether in the boardroom or elsewhere. That evening, as Isabella prepared for a charity event at a luxurious midtown hotel, she gently patted her slightly rounded belly in the mirror. At 3 months pregnant, the changes were still subtle, but she felt them deeply. This child, their first, was the culmination of everything she had dreamed of since her wedding day. On the vanity table lay her emerald earring studs, a gift Thomas had bought after they discovered the pregnancy. The promise of a new chapter shone in their glimmer. Earlier that day, Thomas had been in a business meeting finalizing details for a new condominium project. He was running late, and Isabella tried calling him, but it went to voicemail every time. In the past, she might have worried, possibly even felt a twinge of jealousy. But after years of standing by her billionaire husband, she'd grown confident that he would always be there for her. She had no inkling that something far darker was unfolding behind the scenes. Smiling to herself, Isabella wondered if her childhood best friend, Natalia Brooks, would attend the event. Natalia had been her confidant since middle school. Their bond was unbreakable, or so Isabella believed. Little did she know that the people she trusted most were about to tear her world apart in the most heart-wrenching way possible. The gala was spectacular. Gentle music wafted through the air, mingling with the chatter of New York's elite. Glittering chandeliers hovered above circular tables draped with the finest linens. Society photographers flitted around, capturing candid shots of the city's most influential figures. Between the clinking of champagne glasses and the hum of polite laughter, Isabella found herself scanning the crowd. Thomas still hadn't arrived, though he had promised. In Isabella's circle, punctuality at charity events was a matter of both courtesy and status. Having your spouse absent raised questions. Where was Thomas Rutherford? Even more pressing, where was Natalia Brooks, who'd not responded to Isabella's texts all afternoon? Isabella took a seat at her assigned table. A swirl of worry tugged at her stomach. She sipped water to steady her nerves, patting her growing belly as if to reassure her unborn child that everything was fine. "Thomas will be here," she whispered to herself. "He always is." But as minutes bled into hours, no sign of Thomas or Natalia emerged. Restless, Isabella thanked her host, quietly excused herself from the table, and slipped outside for fresh air. The doorman recognized her at once and signaled for the valet. Thomas's private driver was nowhere to be seen. Casting one more glance at the ornate entrance, Isabella decided to head home. She could have asked any of her well-heeled friends for a lift, but she felt a strange urge for solitude. She yearned for the quiet of her home, away from the spectacle, so she could gather her thoughts. That was when her phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. "Thomas is cheating on you," asked Natalia. Her heart thudded in her chest. She read the text multiple times, her mind racing. This had to be some horrible prank or spam. But who would stoop so low? A swirl of anxiety, disbelief, and heartbreak coursed through her. She tried calling Natalia first, but there was no response. Then she dialed Thomas straight to voicemail again. She was trembling by the time she got into a taxi. Could it be true? The man she cherished, the one she was building a family with, could he really be betraying her? Yet, a quiet voice inside her said that the text might be an omen, a clue she couldn't ignore. By the time Isabella reached the towering Rutherford penthouse, her anxiety had morphed into a dull ache. She navigated the silent corridors, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor, and stepped into the massive living room. Everything was dark, only the city's skyline shimmering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Alone in the shadowy quiet, Isabella sank onto a plush sofa, phone clutched in her hand. She dialed Natalia again. Nothing. She tried Thomas, still nothing. The text message glared back at her as if mocking her innocence. With her free hand, she stroked her belly, whispering, "I hope this isn't true." She desperately wanted an explanation, something, anything to assure her that her life wasn't unraveling. But deep down, she sensed the first cracks in her perfect facade. Morning came with an unwelcome clarity. Isabella woke to the soft light streaming through the penthouse windows. Her eyes felt heavy from a night of restless sleep. She reached for her phone, still no messages from Thomas or Natalia. Fear and anger began to mingle in the pit of her stomach. Normally, Thomas would be seated at the sleek marble breakfast bar, scrolling through emails while sipping black coffee. He was a creature of habit. But as she wandered the silent apartment, no sign of him appeared. She considered calling his office, but hesitated. What would she even say? "Hello, have you seen my husband, who might be cheating on me?" That felt surreal. Determined not to give in to panic, Isabella washed her face, changed into casual attire, and decided to pay Natalia a surprise visit. The doorman outside Natalia's upscale building on the Upper East Side recognized Isabella immediately and allowed her up without question. Natalia's apartment door was slightly ajar, something that struck Isabella as odd. She pushed it open gently, calling out in a soft voice, "Natalia, are you here?" The living room was in disarray, scattered pillows, a glass on the floor, and shoes tossed carelessly near the couch. Heart pounding, Isabella cautiously walked further inside, only to hear hushed voices from the bedroom. Before she could gather her thoughts, Natalia emerged, wearing a silken robe. Her hair was disheveled, and a guilty flush painted her cheeks the moment she saw Isabella standing there. "Bella! What? What are you doing here?" she stammered, her eyes darting toward the hallway. Isabella's mouth felt dry. She tried to maintain composure, but 1,000 questions buzzed in her mind. "I was worried. You didn't show up last night, and I got a strange text. Is Thomas here?" Natalia's eyes flickered with panic. She opened her mouth to deny it, but at that moment, Thomas himself stepped into view behind her. His shirt was unbuttoned, and his hair tousled. At the sight of Isabella, he froze. It was like a slow-motion punch to Isabella's heart. The world around her blurred. She grasped the back of a chair for support, an icy shock pricking her skin. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. The best friend she had trusted with every secret, and the husband she adored, stood side by side, their guilt etched plainly on their faces. For a brief second, no one spoke. Silence reigned, heavier than any words could convey. Then, Isabella turned on her heel, her breath ragged. She marched toward the door, ignoring their frantic calls of her name. Every step felt like a marathon, but she summoned the strength to keep going. She didn't cry, not yet. Only a deep, seething rage coursed through her veins. Images of her and Natalia laughing at slumber parties as teenagers flashed in her mind, mingling with a vision of Thomas slipping a ring on her finger on their wedding day. How had it come to this? Isabella stepped into the elevator, tears threatening to spill, but she fought them back. In that moment, something inside her shifted. A cold, determined calm took hold. She was done being the naive one. If Thomas and Natalia thought they could do this to her while she carried his child, they had made a grave miscalculation. Isabella left Natalia's building in a daze, hailing the first cab she found. As she settled into the back seat, the numbness of shock began fading, replaced by spiraling thoughts. How long has this been going on? Why would they betray me like this? What about our baby? She texted her mother, Margaret Sinclair, a simple message. We need to talk. Urgent. Within moments, her phone rang. Margaret's concerned voice, still carrying the graceful lilt it had when discussing haute couture designs, instantly soothed Isabella's nerves. Without hesitation, Margaret asked her to come over. Margaret Sinclair's townhouse was a peaceful haven on the Upper West Side, a sanctuary of tasteful art pieces and plush furnishings, with a private garden in the back. As soon as Isabella stepped inside, her mother enveloped her in a tight hug, asking no questions until she guided her daughter to the sofa. Finally, tears came rushing out. Between sobs, Isabella recounted what she had discovered that morning. Margaret listened with stricken silence, her expression pained. "My darling, I'm so sorry," she whispered, softly rubbing Isabella's back. "I never trusted that woman, Natalia. She always gave me an odd feeling, but I never imagined Thomas would do this." Margaret offered a steaming cup of chamomile tea, urging Isabella to rest. But rest was the last thing on her mind. She needed to make sense of the betrayal, both personally and financially. Her inheritance from her father's side was substantial, but it was dwarfed by the Rutherford empire. Thomas's assets were spread across countless shell companies and trust funds. Then there was her unborn child to consider. All day, as Margaret tried to console her, Isabella's phone buzzed with calls and text messages from Thomas. She ignored them. The voice messages piled up with apologies, excuses, pleas for forgiveness. She deleted them all, unread. Natalia also tried to reach her, sending frantic texts, begging to explain. Isabella blocked her number. In the late afternoon, Margaret suggested they reach out to one of her oldest friends, David Harrington, a high-powered attorney with a discreet yet fearsome reputation among the city's elite. "He knows how to protect you and the baby, Isabella," Margaret said firmly. "If Thomas thinks he can walk all over you, we'll prove him wrong." That evening, Margaret and Isabella traveled to David Harrington's office on Madison Avenue. A stoic man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, David welcomed them and listened intently. "There's no reason to rush a divorce at this exact moment," he advised after hearing the story. "But, Isabella, you need to protect your interests. As the mother of Thomas's child, you have leverage. If his actions endanger you or the baby's future, you can act. Isabella left the office that night with a folder of documents and a plan forming in her mind. She wasn't sure what she would do yet, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't be silent. She wouldn't let them rob her of dignity and leave unscathed. She was a Sinclair, after all, and more importantly, she was about to become a mother. Her baby deserved a better legacy than betrayal. Thomas had never been a coward. In business, he was always direct, sometimes brutally so. When it came to personal affairs, however, he found himself floundering. Isabella's silence over the past 2 days terrified him more than any furious confrontation ever could. He attempted to see her at the penthouse, but the locks had been changed, and her security detail barred him from entering. He reached out to Margaret Sinclair, only to be rebuffed. Even his personal assistant sensed the tension as hushed whispers buzzed around the Rutherford headquarters. No one knew why the usually unflappable Thomas was pacing his office in disarray. On the 3rd day, he arrived at the penthouse to find Isabella waiting for him in the living room. She stood by the grand piano, her face composed. He noticed the slight curve of her belly, a visible reminder of the life they had created together. He swallowed the lump in his throat and stepped forward cautiously. "Isabella," he began, desperation coloring his tone. "I'm sorry, I never meant," she raised a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want your apologies, Thomas." Her voice was steady, but underneath the calm, he could feel the fury that simmered. "I want to know why." He ran a hand through his hair, struggling for words. "It just happened. There's no excuse. I never wanted to hurt you. I was lonely. You were busy with the pregnancy, and Natalia was—" "Don't you dare blame this on me or my pregnancy," Isabella snapped, her eyes flashing. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone." Thomas stared at the floor, shame washing over him. "I know. I'm not trying to make excuses." They stood in silence for a long minute, the tension thicker than the opulent curtains draped around them. Finally, Isabella spoke again, her gaze intense. "I have no intention of letting you off easily. You and Natalia have betrayed me. You've broken our marriage vows, and I don't trust you. But for the sake of our baby, I suggest we keep things civil, at least in public." Thomas nodded hesitantly, relief and concern mixing. "So what does that mean? You want a divorce?" Isabella exhaled, her features set in determination. "Not yet. I haven't decided. But I won't just accept this. If you're expecting me to slink away quietly, think again. I'm a Sinclair. I know my worth." A hint of anxiety flickered in Thomas's eyes. After all, the Rutherfords weren't the only powerful name at play here. In the hush of that luxurious room, he realized that Isabella wasn't the naive woman he once thought he could manipulate. She was evolving, stronger than ever. Before he could say another word, she turned on her heel and walked toward the door, pausing only to say, "Don't contact me unless it's about the baby or something official. I'll decide where we go from here. And don't think for a second that Natalia is off the hook. You both have no idea what you've started." As she left, Thomas sank onto a chair, his heart pounding. He knew all too well an angry Isabella Sinclair was a force of nature, and he had unleashed a storm that might just destroy them all. True to her word, Isabella outwardly maintained composure. She still made appearances at society functions solo, yet impeccably poised. When reporters asked after Thomas, she merely smiled and mentioned business obligations. The rumor mill churned, but no one could confirm the whispers of trouble in paradise. Behind the scenes, however, Isabella was a whirlwind of activity. She had engaged David Harrington to dig deeper into Thomas's business operations. He uncovered something startling. While the Rutherford empire was vast, a significant portion of Thomas's holdings were privately financed by high-interest loans. Apparently, Thomas had over-leveraged for his latest developments, taking risky bets to rapidly expand his portfolio. This was a potential weakness, one Isabella intended to exploit. If Thomas's projects failed, or if lenders got spooked, he could lose everything. And since much of the Rutherford estate was tied up in these ventures, the family name could suffer irreparable damage too. As for Natalia, Isabella was planning something more personal. After some quiet inquiries, she discovered that her former best friend had fallen into financial troubles despite her lavish lifestyle. Natalia's parents had been wealthy, but a series of bad investments drained their fortune, leaving her scrambling to maintain appearances. So when Thomas came along, flush with cash and attracted to danger, Natalia couldn't resist. One evening, Isabella invited her trusted circle to her mother's townhouse. Among them were old friends, like Grace and Fiona, who had known Isabella and Natalia since high school. Over cups of freshly brewed coffee, she told them the truth about Thomas and Natalia's affair. Gasps and exclamations of disbelief filled the room. Many had suspected something amiss, but hearing it confirmed left them outraged on Isabella's behalf. That night, she formed an alliance of sorts. Grace was a savvy PR consultant. She knew how to spin a narrative or leak a rumor that could shape public opinion. Fiona was an events coordinator who had her ear to the ground on every major social gathering. Together, they could orchestrate subtle but devastating attacks on Natalia's reputation and Thomas's ventures. It started small, a rumor that Thomas's new luxury condo project was behind schedule, a whisper that Rutherford Real Estate was defaulting on some of its loans, anonymous tips to tabloids linking Natalia to questionable financial dealings. These seemingly isolated tidbits began to snowball, setting tongues wagging among New York's elite. Meanwhile, Isabella kept a cool distance from Thomas. At public events, if they had to appear together, her smile never wavered, but her eyes never met his. He tried to charm her back, sending lavish gifts and flowers, but she refused them all. Friends and acquaintances noticed the strain, but were too polite or afraid to pry. Just when Thomas thought the worst might be behind them, Isabella's cunning moves began to unravel his carefully manicured world. He didn't see it yet, but the seeds of revenge had been planted, and they were about to bear a fruit more bitter than he could have ever imagined. Thomas could feel the weight closing in on him. Investors who once eagerly lined up to fund his projects started hesitating. Bankers who had been lenient about loan extensions suddenly became less accommodating. Even his father, George Rutherford, requested an urgent meeting to discuss the rumors swirling around the family business. The day George summoned him to Rutherford Tower, Thomas braced himself. His father was formidable, a seasoned businessman in his late 60s, who valued the Rutherford name above all else. In George's office, oak panels and antique furniture lent an air of gravitas to the conversation. "What's this nonsense about your condo project being behind schedule?" George snapped. "And the talk of you messing around with private loans." Thomas tried to maintain his composure. "It's just gossip, Dad. I've got it under control." George's stern glare didn't waver. "Look, son, you've always been ambitious, which I admire, but you've taken too many risks lately. You'd better handle these rumors before they tarnish our reputation." Thomas swallowed his pride. He promised to resolve everything quickly, but as soon as he left Rutherford Tower, he realized he had no clear plan. The orchestrated rumors were coming from multiple directions. No matter how many times he tried to refute them, another story emerged. His CFO, Linda Morales, noticed the downturn. "Thomas, we need a damage control strategy," she advised. "Our brand can't sustain these hits indefinitely." While he was busy fighting fires on the business front, his personal life continued to crumble. Natalia, feeling snubbed by both polite society and Thomas, who was not publicly claiming her, started to panic. She bombarded him with text messages and calls, demanding he leave Isabella and make their relationship official. But Thomas knew that divorcing Isabella abruptly, especially given her family's resources, would be a public nightmare. The social ramifications were enormous, not to mention the potential legal entanglements. If I push for a divorce now, he thought grimly, I might lose half my assets or more, especially if Isabella can prove adultery. To complicate matters, Natalia began hinting that she might go public with their affair if Thomas didn't comply with her demands. After one particularly heated argument in Natalia's apartment, Thomas left in a fit of rage, slamming the door behind him. He realized too late that he had entangled himself with a desperate woman who had nothing left to lose. All the while, Isabella watched from a distance, carefully pulling the strings. Through her alliances, she spread carefully chosen tidbits of gossip, never too blatant, never directly traced back to her. She began discreetly meeting with realtors and attorneys, exploring legal channels to isolate Thomas financially. For every step Thomas tried to take towards stability, Isabella ensured a subtle nudge pushed him back. Yet Isabella wasn't consumed solely by revenge. She attended every prenatal appointment, focusing on the well-being of her baby. She meditated, worked with a personal trainer specializing in pregnancy, and consulted with nutritionists. The turmoil in her marriage, oddly enough, sharpened her resolve to give her child the best start possible. Soon enough, the tension between Thomas, Natalia, and the mounting pressures from all sides reached a boiling point. The cracks in their once perfect facade were about to split wide open, and Isabella was ready to watch them collapse. Amidst the roiling chaos, one event loomed large on the social calendar, the annual Rutherford Foundation Gala. It was typically a night of glamour and prestige, with society's finest in attendance. This year, however, it felt more like a ticking time bomb. Thomas had no choice but to attend. His presence was expected to reassure investors that everything remained under control. Though Isabella was technically still the hostess, she made it clear she wouldn't be arriving on his arm. Instead, she agreed to show up separately, purely for appearance's sake. When the big night arrived, the ballroom at the Plaza Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and lavish floral arrangements. Hundreds of guests mingled in designer gowns and tuxedos, sipping champagne and gossiping in hushed tones about the rumors swirling around the Rutherfords. At the center of it all stood Thomas, wearing a tailored midnight blue tux, plastering on a carefully practiced smile. Then Isabella entered, regal in a floor-length emerald gown that showcased her growing baby bump with elegant grace. Heads turned instantly. She greeted guests warmly, her posture exuding confidence. Thomas felt a pang of admiration despite everything. Isabella's poise was undeniable, and it made him painfully aware of the magnitude of his betrayal. To the surprise of many, Natalia also made a brazen entrance. She wore a daring red dress, cut to accentuate her figure, and made no attempt to keep her distance from Thomas. The tension in the air became palpable whenever the three of them were in sight of each other. Camera flashes followed their every move, capturing a silent drama beneath the gilded decor. Midway through the evening, Isabella discreetly approached the stage with the foundation's board members for a brief speech. She spoke about the charity's mission providing educational grants for underprivileged children and concluded with a heartfelt note on unity and trust. Her final line, directed at the sea of wealthy donors, dripped with implication. It is in the darkest moments that true loyalty is tested. May we all honor that sacred bond. Moments later, Natalia cornered Thomas near the lavish buffet. "What am I doing here alone?" she hissed, her voice seething with frustration. "You said you'd be there for me. Instead, you're playing the dutiful husband while everyone whispers behind our backs." Thomas tried to maintain his composure. "Now, Isn't the time, Natalia? We'll talk later, okay? But Natalia wouldn't be placated. She raised her voice, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. In a desperate, self-destructive move, she blurted, "Don't treat me like your secret, Thomas. Not when you're the one who made the first move. You think you can throw me aside when it suits you?" He paled, noticing the stares from stunned onlookers, including some key investors. A few cameras clicked, capturing the heated exchange. The humiliating scene was precisely what he'd feared. Isabella, observing from across the room, felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. The carefully orchestrated meltdown was playing out perfectly. In a panic, Thomas grabbed Natalia's arm and tried to steer her away. But the damage had already been done. Everyone witnessed the outburst enough to confirm that the rumors of an affair were not mere speculation. With tensions spiraling, the Rutherford Foundation Gala turned from a fundraiser into a spectacle. And at its heart stood three figures locked in a disastrous dance: the billionaire husband, his pregnant wife, and the best friend who had become the lightning rod for scandal. In the days following the gala, tabloids exploded with headlines. Photos of the tense confrontation between Thomas and Natalia spread like wildfire, accompanied by wild speculation about the impending collapse of the Rutherford marriage. A few articles even hinted at Thomas's failing business ventures and Natalia's rumored financial desperation. Thomas's phone rang. Non-stop journalists, business associates, and family members wanted answers. Even his father, George Rutherford, was livid. "How could you let this happen?" George fumed over the phone. "You've compromised the very name we've spent generations building. Sort this out, or I will." Behind the scenes, Isabella quietly fed more fuel to the fire. Grace, her PR ally, arranged an exclusive leak to a well-known society columnist, revealing that Isabella had not been receiving the emotional or financial support a pregnant wife should expect. The piece described Thomas's reported mismanagement of funds and an extravagant lifestyle with a mistress at the cost of philanthropic commitments. Public opinion began swinging in Isabella's favor. Online forums buzzed with sympathy for the betrayed wife carrying Thomas's heir. Women's advocacy groups subtly picked up her story, how she balanced heartbreak, a complicated pregnancy, and public scrutiny, all with grace. Isabella never gave an official statement, but that only made the narrative more captivating. Meanwhile, the financial repercussions grew dire. Banks started reviewing their loans to Rutherford Real Estate. Some smaller investors threatened to back out entirely. Linda Morales, the CFO, tried to salvage deals, but every day brought a new damaging headline. The once stable empire was teetering on the brink. Forced into a corner, Thomas attempted to stabilize the situation. He scheduled a press conference, hoping to reassure shareholders. However, on the morning of the event, an explosive article dropped. A confidential spreadsheet detailing Rutherford Real Estate's precarious cash flow situation was leaked to major news outlets. It showed ballooning interest payments and razor-thin margins. The source of this leak was a mystery, at least to Thomas, but Isabella knew exactly who arranged it. David Harrington had quietly obtained the documents through a well-placed contact in Thomas's own finance team, who disliked her boss's arrogance and felt morally obligated to help Isabella. With that data in the public eye, it became almost impossible for Thomas to deny the severity of his financial crisis. As if orchestrated by fate, Natalia too faced backlash. Luxury boutiques withdrew her credit lines, citing the negative press. Former friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the woman who wrecked a marriage and stole from charitable funds, the latter rumor heavily fueled by Isabella's network. Now ostracized and financially squeezed, Natalia clung to Thomas, demanding he fix it all. But Thomas could barely hold himself together. His once impenetrable fortress was cracking under the twin pressures of scandal and debt. Isabella observed from the sidelines, unwavering. She felt a pang of sadness for the man she had once loved, but her anger and sense of justice overshadowed any pity. If Thomas and Natalia believed she would bow down, they had grossly underestimated her. She was determined to see this through, no matter how high the stakes grew. With pressure mounting, Thomas cornered Isabella in the penthouse one night, demanding answers. He had let himself in using a spare key he'd secretly kept, surprising her in the living room. She wasn't frightened, but she was annoyed. She had hoped to avoid such an unplanned confrontation. "What have you been doing?" Thomas barked, his eyes flashing. "I know it's you behind these leaks, these rumors. Why are you destroying everything we built?" Isabella remained composed, standing by a large window overlooking the sparkling city skyline. She crossed her arms, her pregnancy evident under a loose-fitting satin robe. "You destroyed our marriage the moment you betrayed me with Natalia," she said coldly. "I'm simply ensuring you face the consequences. You can't think you can walk over me without repercussions." Thomas's frustration boiled over. "You're jeopardizing our child's future," he spat. "If I go down, you go down too." Isabella's expression hardened. "Wrong. My personal assets and inheritance are well protected, thanks to my family trust. You, on the other hand, are riding a wave of over-leverage, lavish spending, and scandal. The baby will be fine, Thomas. I'll see to that." Her words stung him. He realized just how thoroughly he was trapped. The empire he'd expanded so aggressively was now teetering, and Isabella held all the cards. A flicker of desperation crossed his face. "Then what do you want?" he asked, his voice a notch quieter. She regarded him calmly. "An apology would be a start, a real one, not just for me, but for our baby. A promise. You'll never try to slander me to salvage your reputation. And I want you to cut Natalia out of your life entirely if you want any chance at mending this." Thomas exhaled, rage and remorse twisting inside him. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Isabella's security guard announced that David Harrington had arrived. Seeing the lawyer, Thomas's face paled. "What's he doing here?" David stepped into the room, greeting Thomas with a polite nod before turning to Isabella. "I brought the revised documents," David said. "For your consideration." Thomas's pulse raced. Documents? He immediately suspected divorce papers, but his heart clenched when he realized that if Isabella served them now, with his public image in shambles and personal finances on the edge, the settlement could ruin him completely. Without a word, Isabella took the folder from David and placed it on the table. "We can talk about this tomorrow, Thomas," she said, her tone final. "For now, I'd like you to leave." He hesitated, wanting to protest, but found himself at a loss. With a frustrated sigh, he strode toward the door. Just before exiting, he turned back, casting Isabella a pained look. "I'm sorry," he whispered, almost inaudible, before leaving her to the silence of the penthouse. Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision. The confrontation had left her shaken. It was never easy to watch the father of her unborn child unravel, but she reminded herself of his betrayal and that single agonized plea from her younger self. "Never let them think you are weak." Outside, the city lights shimmered. Inside, a marriage lay in shreds, and the final blow was yet to come. Natalia Brooks paced frantically in her apartment, glancing at her phone every few seconds. She'd left countless voicemails for Thomas in the past few days, but he wasn't responding. Her credit cards were maxed out, and eviction notices loomed thanks to her unpaid rent. The once fashionable decor of her home now felt like a testament to her failing ruse as a wealthy socialite. An unexpected knock startled her. She dashed to the door, hoping it might be Thomas, only to find Fiona, one of the few friends she had left. But the moment she saw Fiona's icy expression, her heart sank. "Fiona, what's going on?" Natalia asked, stepping aside to let her in. Fiona entered without preamble. "I need to retrieve some items for Isabella," she said stiffly. "She told me you have a few of her belongings here from years back, old keepsakes." Natalia looked confused. Why couldn't she text me? I have no idea. Then it dawned on her. Isabella must have set this up, sending Fiona to deliver a message. "You are no longer welcome in my life." "Also," Fiona added, her gaze unwavering, "I wanted to see for myself if the rumors are true that you're broke, that Thomas has cut you off." Natalia bristled. "Get out, Fiona. This is none of your business." Fiona crossed her arms. "I was Isabella's friend long before you wormed your way into her trust. And I'm not leaving until I have what I came for." Feeling cornered, Natalia gestured angrily toward a box in the closet. "Fine, take whatever is Isabella's." Her voice cracked. "But tell her I never meant for this to happen. I was lonely, and it just sort of spiraled out of control." Fiona snorted in disgust. "And you thought sleeping with her husband was the solution?" She picked up the box and headed for the door. "You should be ashamed. We all trusted you." In a moment of vulnerability, Natalia's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't plan it. I thought Thomas loved me, but now he's gone too. Please, Fiona, can't you at least put in a word for me? I have nowhere else to turn." Fiona paused, her gaze cold. "You made your bed, now lie in it. Isabella owes you nothing. You destroyed her marriage and made a fool of yourself in the process. You're lucky she hasn't done worse to you." With that, Fiona left, leaving Natalia trembling and alone. The conversation made it clear. Her last ties to the social circle were severed. She sat on her couch, hugging a pillow, tears streaming down her cheeks. She realized too late that she had overplayed her hand, expecting Thomas to protect her. But Thomas had his own troubles, and Natalia was now merely an inconvenience. Had it been worth it? She wondered, thinking of all the deceit and heartbreak. In that dark, lonely apartment, Natalia finally understood. Once Isabella Sinclair set her sights on your downfall, there was little chance of escape. The best friend she had betrayed was stronger and smarter than she had ever given her credit for. In a turn of events that felt almost surreal, Thomas found himself on the verge of personal and financial collapse. The banks demanded immediate repayment of several large loans. His largest development project stalled due to lack of funds, and prospective buyers were withdrawing their deposits. Stockholders in the publicly traded arms of the Rutherford Empire clamored for his resignation. Even George Rutherford threatened to disown him if he didn't step down to save face. Meanwhile, Isabella stayed busy finalizing her legal strategy with David Harrington. She attended her prenatal appointments religiously, focusing on maintaining her health. Despite the turmoil, she felt a renewed sense of clarity, like a dark fog lifting. Then came the day she served Thomas with a meticulously prepared set of documents, separation papers, outlining strict conditions that would safeguard her and the baby. There was a clause awarding her sole custody if Thomas could not prove financial stability and emotional fitness. Another clause demanded that Thomas relinquish certain business assets if he defaulted on spousal support. Thomas sat in his half-empty office, scanning the documents, shaking his head in despair. "You want everything," he muttered. "My God, Isabella, I never wanted it to come to this." She stood across from him, her posture regal despite the late stages of pregnancy. "You wanted it the moment you chose to cheat on me with Natalia," she replied quietly. "But I'll let you keep enough to rebuild your life, just not at my expense or our child's." Resigned, Thomas signed. It was the most humiliating moment of his life. The father he had once tried so hard to impress was now threatening to remove him from the family business. His mistress had turned into a liability. The only person who had once stood by him, Isabella, now meticulously dismantled the empire he had built on arrogance and greed. With the papers signed, Isabella left, a calm smile playing on her lips. She had her closure. The moment felt triumphant, yet bittersweet. Within days, Thomas's resignation from Rutherford Real Estate was announced publicly. He retreated to his private estate in the Hamptons, rarely seen by the city's high society again. Natalia, facing eviction and social exile, attempted to contact him, but he ignored her calls, wanting nothing to do with the reminder of his downfall. A month later, Isabella gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Alexander Sinclair Rutherford. The press was abuzz. Photos showed Isabella cradling the infant, surrounded by her mother, Margaret, and close friends. The tabloids hailed her as a paragon of strength, the woman who took on a cheating billionaire and won. Thomas sent a bouquet of white lilies with a heartfelt note, "For our son, I'm sorry." Isabella placed the flowers aside, reflecting on the irony. She would never stand in the way of Alexander knowing his father, but she would also ensure he understood the lessons of betrayal, trust, and consequences. In the end, Thomas and Natalia lost everything that truly mattered: reputation, fortune, and any semblance of genuine love. Isabella, meanwhile, emerged stronger than ever, forging a new legacy for herself and her child. Her transformation from naive wife to formidable force showed one undeniable truth. In a world where loyalty is sold to the highest bidder, never underestimate the resolve of a woman scorned. Even after the paperwork was signed and the dust settled, the echoes of Thomas's betrayal continued to ripple through the social circles of New York. Isabella's phone buzzed with messages from acquaintances who offered carefully worded support, each one testing the waters of her forgiveness. Though she maintained a cordial exterior, Isabella knew she would never fully forget the sting of treachery. Yet, she resolved not to let bitterness define her. She had new priorities, chief among them, baby Alexander. Late autumn leaves drifted across the penthouse balcony where Isabella often stood, gently rocking her infant son. Some evenings, she imagined how life might have been if Thomas had been faithful, an unbroken family, a child born into love rather than scandal. But those were fleeting thoughts. She couldn't change the past. Instead, she poured her energy into creating a nurturing environment for Alexander, determined that his future would not be tainted by his father's mistakes. Despite their bitter parting, Isabella agreed to a temporary visitation schedule. Thomas, pressed by both guilt and paternal instinct, made an effort to see his son at least once a month. Arriving in a modest black SUV rather than a flashy limousine, he was far from the commanding figure he used to be. Even his suits seemed to hang a bit looser, as if the weight of his downfall had stripped him of more than just material wealth. At first, Isabella observed these visits like an overseer, cautious, protective. But gradually, she saw flickers of genuine affection in Thomas's interactions with Alexander. He cradled the baby with a gentleness she had never witnessed before. Though their relationship remained strained, there was a faint sense of unspoken understanding. Thomas had paid dearly for his betrayal, and Isabella had fought hard for her dignity. They were no longer husband and wife, but two individuals bonded by a child's well-being. Still, any hope of reconciliation stayed buried. Thomas's apologies, no matter how sincere, couldn't bridge the vast chasm that now separated them. Meanwhile, rumors swirled of Natalia packing her belongings in the dead of night to escape angry creditors. She retreated to a small rental outside the city. No longer welcomed in society's inner circle, she lived in solitude, haunted by the memory of a friendship she had shattered for a fleeting taste of wealth and excitement. Whispers suggested she had reached out to Thomas for financial help. Her calls remained unanswered. In contrast, Isabella's life began to blossom. She renewed her involvement in charity work this time, with a focus on single mothers and women facing unexpected crises. Her experiences had shown her how betrayal could upend one's world, and she wanted to provide resources, counseling, and safe havens for those in need. Under her guidance, the Rutherford Foundation gradually expanded its programs, transforming scandal into purpose. During one sunny afternoon, Isabella gazed at her son, who gurgled happily in her arms. Despite the heartbreak and turmoil of the past, she felt a serene sense of hope. Alexander's eyes, so filled with innocence, seemed to promise a future untouched by deceit. She pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, reminding herself that love, real love, wasn't about fairy tale illusions. It was about resilience, empathy, and standing tall for those who depend on you, no matter the storms raging outside. In that quiet moment on the balcony, Isabella Sinclair realized she had not merely survived her ordeal, she had transformed. The story of her life wasn't about the cheating billionaire or the backstabbing best friend. It was about a woman who refused to be broken, shaping a new destiny for herself and her son, one built on integrity, determination, and the unwavering conviction that sometimes losing everything is the first step toward finding oneself again. No matter how lofty our positions or how untouchable we believe we are, life has a way of humbling us. Thomas Rutherford learned that the hard way when his betrayal spiraled into ruin, dragging Natalia Brooks down with him. Yet Isabella Sinclair emerged from the tempest stronger, proving that a determined spirit can shape destiny even against seemingly insurmountable odds. If you've been captivated by this turbulent saga of love, betrayal, and retribution, don't forget to support this channel. Like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss our next enthralling story. Your engagement helps us bring more riveting real-life fiction and inspiring tales right to you. Join our community and stay tuned for more dramatic twists, heartfelt triumphs, and unforgettable characters. Thank you for watching, and remember, karma seldom forgets, and neither should you.